much to EPSA for this really great conference. I want to set the stage a little bit here because we have such an amazingly brilliant panel of experts up here, and I'm so excited to talk about really the topic that I feel like I am constantly talking to everyone all the time about, which is resource adequacy and how to keep the lights on in the face of rising load, in the face of really difficult conditions for building new infrastructure and connecting new infrastructure. And I'm really grateful to have a variety of perspectives. These are the folks who are really on the front lines of making those decisions and trying to figure out how to meet this rising load. And so I really want to dig into the specific regional and state issues, as well as, of course, the national picture. So Manu, I'll start with you, the biggest grid operator in the country. And you all have really laid out your concerns about the potential shortfalls that you're facing in the next several years and really laid out the urgency of that. Can you talk us through the specific trends and the data that's driving those concerns from your perspective, and how does that compare historically to past reliability challenges that you all have faced?
Yeah, you bet, Catherine. Can you all hear me in the back? This thing on? Okay, excellent. Well, thank you for having me. Look, from our perspective, we have been talking about this challenge for a couple of years now, right? And there are 3.5 trends. I'll throw in a bonus one. The first one really has been the retirement of a lot of the existing thermal generation, a lot of it driven by policy pressure, although some of it certainly driven by economic pressure, and we can talk about that, but a lot of it driven by policy pressure. And we have seen that accelerate over the last several years. The second trend is really the queue, right? We've got in the queue a lot of intermittent renewable generation, and that's good. We want the renewable generation, but it is not a substitute for the generation that we're losing. It's not a one-for-one substitute. Roughly, for a megawatt of nameplate capacity for solar, I get about 0.1 megawatt of nuclear, just to give you a sort of order of comparison. And what's in the queue has been coming in relatively slowly, partly because the queue took a long time to process, but we are very much through a lot of that. But we're still looking at supply chain issues and other issues. The third trend, of course, is demand growth. And to give you a sense of the numbers for PJM, last year we served a peak load of roughly 152 gigawatts. In 2030, we're projecting roughly 184 gigawatts. So 32 gigawatt increase in load. Right? Data centers, 5 gigawatts last year, 6, call it. 36 in 2030. So 30 gigawatts of load growth is data center driven. A lot of our load growth, and it's different by region, is driven by data centers. And so those are the 3 trends. You put them together, and we have been really concerned about resource adequacy and taking a lot of steps. And we can talk about those steps as we get in. I promised an additional trend. That is, we're seeing risk on our system shift to the winter. And I think we've been seeing this trend actually in our industry for a while, right? Polar Vortex 2014 in PJM, Winter Storm Uri in Texas, Winter Storm Elliott, other events. And I think our industry has taken a while to wake up to this trend. I think we have dismissed some of these events as outliers, right? Unusual things that won't repeat, and they keep repeating. And I think the lesson from that really is that we need to think differently about resource adequacy with a view towards serving load in the summer and the winter. And so I think those are some of the trends. Clearly there is a growing resource adequacy risk, but I think we have also all been doing a lot about it. And so I'll say I'm pretty optimistic, and we'll get into some of those things.
Yeah, glad it's a long panel here because we'll definitely get into what everyone is doing to solve these issues. But I want to move over to MISO, and could you set the stage a bit for what your region is experiencing with resource adequacy, extreme weather, all of that?
Sure, thanks, Catherine. Is my microphone on? Yeah. Okay, good. First I want to say thanks to Todd and EPSA for the invitation and the opportunity to be here today. Important discussion certainly going on this topic. So set the stage for MISO. PJM has raised the flag and projected that they're approaching, in current trends, they'll approach minimum planning reserve requirements by 2030. That happened in MISO in 2022. So we have been at minimum planning reserves for the last few years. and we've been trading water with our states and our members to try and stay at minimums for the last few years, and this year included. We're wrapping up our spring capacity auction right now, and all expectations are we're going to be close again to minimums over most of the footprint. So what have been the drivers of that? It's similar to Manu's comments. About 10 years ago, many of our states implemented some state policies and even local utility policies around carbon reduction. Those led to incentives both around the state level with some federal incentives as well that led to a pretty aggressive approach to retirement of legacy, primarily dispatchable resources, the replacement resources, primarily weather-dependent renewables, and as was explained, on an accredited firm value planning basis, it's certainly not one for one. So over the last 10 years, we've rapidly worked down our surplus planning reserves and kind of hit minimum. Once you get to minimum, it really is all hands on deck at that point to figure out what we can do to maintain. Now, this has occurred in an environment of essentially zero load growth, which is true to today. We're forecasting load growth to be part of our future starting essentially immediately. So 15 years of zero load growth. We just updated our long-term load forecast in December, and we're showing annual growth rates of nearing 2% over the next 4 to 5 years. And then for the balance of our 20-year period, we're showing that accelerating up to about 3.5%. So again, pretty good load growth. You get out 15 years or so, our load in MISO compared to today is, on an energy and capacity basis, is increasing about 60%. So what have we done? We've been working with our members in our states. We have a strong partnership with our state regulators, the Organization of MISO States, OMS. Once we hit minimum and cleared at minimums in the 2022 auction, our partnership became closer still, right? But it's been a great partnership with OMS. They've really worked with us on a lot of the improvements we needed to make in MISO's processes of resource adequacy planning across the footprint, including some significant changes from our state's perspective. The responsibility, accountability for retirement and investment decisions on the supply side really remains still with our members, our load-serving entities, asset owners, as well as our state regulators. So partnering with them on changes that MISO implements to support their obligations to make sure we've got a good resource adequacy plan across the region has been very important. We've implemented some significant changes on our annual planning process or annual capacity market process over recent years. We moved from an annual to a seasonal process to make sure we can capture some of those seasonal issues that are the new reality of high penetration renewable fleets. We've transformed the process of price formation in that construct as well. Those of you that have followed MISO's capacity construct are probably aware that we've had a vertical demand curve in place until this auction. So we filed and implemented a slope demand curve with the support of our states, and that will be used to clear this current auction. Accreditation reforms, moving to ELCC type methodologies was another major reform that we partnered with our OMS members on as well. So that's a high-level description of kind of where things stand in MISO and what we've been doing, and I look forward to the discussion.
Yeah, thank you. And I think when you think about resource adequacy, obviously the times of most concern are when it's hottest and when it's coldest, right? And Rich, to quote you from last year, which I was told I was allowed to do, what kept you up at night last year was the winter of 2032. And I'm wondering if anything has changed since then, or whether that's still the thing that keeps you up.
So, can you hear me? Okay, is that better? Okay, thanks. So thank you for that that question. You know, when I think about some of the steps that we've taken, I am encouraged. We've done a lot of fine-tuning of our planning capabilities, thinking about getting the appropriate capacity accreditation in place. We have some new rules that are underway right now, recognizing the value and aligning the compensation for firm fuel, whether that's dual fuel or whether that's firm gas supply. So we're valuing that appropriately in the market, so generators are encouraged to make those kind of investments. We had good performance during Winter Storm Elliott, in part because of the some of the changes we took and the access to dual fuel. So I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable about the winter. So last year, you know, I talked to you about what kept me up at night was my fear of the future. Now what keeps me up at night is memories from my youth. So I'm going to go back to when I was a junior engineer decades and decades ago at Niagara Mohawk Power Corporation in Syracuse, New York. Matt Picardi's in here. Shout out to him. And I remember working in power plants, in some of these power plants that were in and around the Niagara Mohawk system. And what I learned was they had been really strong performers, really good plants, well run. And when I talked to the engineers, I said, so how long are these things going to run before we got to replace them? They said, oh, these are great. They're going to make it till the end of the century for sure. So now here we are in 2025. We're still counting on those plants, and we're counting on them being there for at least the next 10 years of our planning horizon, and there is nothing lined up to replace them. So I worry about that. I worry about the adequacy that the plant owners have to do the necessary maintenance and life extension, which is going to be so crucial. I worry about having the right kind of incentives, and as we think about, you know, in New York, resource adequacy and this conversion transition of the generation fleet was made a big bet on offshore wind and the ability for offshore wind to be developed on time, interconnect directly into the load pockets in New York City. And now we've seen tremendous delays, and who knows how long these delays are, both from supply chain issues, cost factors, and now, you know, from a siting and permitting challenges that we're hearing about. So how long do we rely on these assets that have been sitting out there for a long time? We need more. We need new assets, but we also need these existing assets to continue to be maintained and perform. And so that's the thing that I think is a little changed.
Thanks, Rich. And Camilla, I want to turn to you for the national perspective. You know, how widespread is resource adequacy looking out into the future, and are the processes that we have in place and the systems that we have in place sufficient to ensure that we can keep reliability across regions over the next few years?
Thank you for the question. Can you hear me? No? Hello? Now? Good. Well, thank you for the question, and thank you, EPSA, for the invitation. Great to be here. Thank you for putting emphasis on reliability and security. That's always good. So glad to make the point. So I'll answer the question with a few data points from our most recent long-term reliability assessment that we do every year. We released that back in December. So if you look over the next 10 years, the level of demand growth that we anticipate based on the data that we collect from all the regions is 132 gigawatts for the summer, and this is on-peak capacity growth. So that's important. And then in the winter, it's almost 150 gigawatts. At the same time, over the next 10 years, we expect to see 115 gigawatts of retirements. So I'm an engineer, but I don't practice. If you put those two on a map, on a chart, one is going up, the other one is going down. So it is going in the opposite directions, the wrong direction, some people would say. So we do have an issue. When you do the math across the US, you see that the map that we have, more than 50% of the US is at risk of kind of resource energy adequacy issues. So similar to what MISO, we're going to be running very, very tight, the system. So that's going to be something that, at least absent infrastructure investment, is going to happen across more than half of the US. A couple of other data points I would just add to that. One is our reliance on the gas system. 20 years ago, gas generation was only 15% of gas generation in the US. Today, we're at 40, 45%, but during the winter, where some regions are relying on gas 70, 80% of the time. So that reliance on the gas system is going to continue, and it's only going to increase over the next 5 to 10 years. The other piece that complicates the matter is, I think, the weather patterns that we need to worry about. So weather patterns today are kind of longer, deeper, and impact a broader set of regions. So that's going to create, and will continue to create, a lot of resource energy adequacy issues. The other piece is now, given that we have more renewables in the system, we need to worry about other weather patterns that we didn't have to worry about before, such as wind and solar droughts. So again, the main point is that the system is going to be very tight, and this is not in 10 years. This is going to happen over the next 5 years. So in the meantime, we need to kind of work on the operating parameters to run a system that is going to be tight, because new base load infrastructure is going to take time to get into the system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do want to pose a question to everyone about the data, because I feel like a couple of times today it's been raised of, well, you know, how do we know all of this will pan out? And obviously, the data that most people have is stuff that you all are providing, and you kind of have the closest view into this. So I mean, how much can we trust the data that's coming out now, and where is there maybe room for nuance of, oh, you know, that could change? Could you just demystify that a bit, I guess?
So yeah, a couple points on that. One is we do collect the data from all the regions. We tend to be conservative in how we approach it. We only try to count on things that we are certain, both on the demand and on the retirement side. I would say that on a total basis, the 132 to 150 gigawatts of growth, we feel comfortable, and it's not only data center, large loads. There is economic activity, bringing industry back to the US. There is electrification trends. We believe that out of the 132, about half might be large loads. So on a total basis, we feel comfortable with the number. Regionally, there might be some differences, there might be some double counting, but we do see some significant growth, and we began to see that over the last 2 to 3 years. So we've already been seeing that happen over the last couple of years. So those are a few of the data points that we have from the data growth side.
Okay. Anyone else? Anything?
Yeah, I'm happy to take it. And if I could ask AV if you could activate the mic 6, or Rich and I will share. But we'll see if we get it working. Okay, great. Look, I think, Catherine, we are in a time of unprecedented uncertainty from PJM's perspective, right? We have, I talked about this 30 gigawatts of data center growth between 24 and 30. I don't know if it's going to be 30 gigawatts. That's our best estimate. We have worked with our utilities very hard to put that together. It's certainly not the gross number. If you add up the gross number that the utilities are seeing, it is many multiples of that number. So there's been a lot of filtration that has gotten us down to that number. But it's a huge number, and the pace at which it will come is very uncertain. At the same time, you know, there's a lot of policy-driven retirements, and what the policy landscape will be around those retirements is very uncertain as well. So I think the industry is dealing with a lot of unknowns, and I don't think we have the luxury to do nothing. I think we have to make our best estimates and move forward and keep doing that. But it is very uncertain.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm pushing my team to do a much better job of is the modeling of how these loads perform, right? So it's important to know where they are and when they're going to come in and at what quantities. But it's also as important to understand the actual performance characteristics of it, and that's so crucial to the studies that we do. We heard on the panel this morning, you know, these loads, the data center loads are presumed to be, you know, 5 nines reliability. Absolutely, and we've got to be able to plan for that. But they're not at their max output 5 nines of the time, right? And when you think about some of the performance characteristics, we've been spending a lot of time meeting with developers, meeting with some of these load entities. There is some willingness with some of them to think about reductions, and some of them are even in our DER program. And with a willingness, you know, for financial incentives to scale back. They can shift it in blocks from time to time. And even the ones that are, their needs are at peak, and in New York anyway, this is chip fab manufacturing. Like when they are on full output and they are performing, it is at the top, and it's at the top for the duration of that product run. But they're not always on product runs, right? So there is some flexibility in terms of how they can schedule that. And the more that we learn about that and the more that we can build that into our models and the more that we can improve our forecasts, then you know, that just gives us a more accurate picture of the future. Manu's exactly right. It's uncertainties. The uncertainties are pretty wide as you get out into the future. But to the extent that we can build those models and get that forecasting so much better, will just give us a much more realistic of the future view of the future, and then we can design our market rules appropriately to incentivize that kind of performance.
Catherine, if I could add one thing,
Yeah.
it is real. We are seeing demand grow. We're seeing higher loads in the winter. We have utilities that are setting multiple records in the same season. It's a summer peaking utility that's setting a winter peak that is their all-time load record. So we're seeing the demand. It's not that it's not there. It's more about what pace it will grow from here.
Yeah, I think what I'm, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add that for MISO, we've historically relied on a baseline forecasting approach where we've leaned on our members' forecasts, our LSE members, on where they think their loads are going. About a year ago, we started recognizing that that process is missing some of the loads around this uncertainty we're talking about. So MISO started supplementing those baseline forecasts with a region-wide probabilistic set of uncertainties to supplement that load. I mentioned earlier, MISO recently updated our long-term load forecast and we incorporated some of those methodologies. So it's also uncertain, but we're trying to create some parameters to bound those uncertainties, which leads to the ability to develop some scenarios and forecasts that cover that space that at least give us the ability to start looking at probabilities around those base forecasts and what might happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think what I'm hearing is, even if you don't know exactly where all this load is going to end up, at the end of the decade or the century or what have you, what I've certainly heard from other folks, and I think from you all, is consistently that we wish we had more grid infrastructure yesterday, and we need more. And so I want to talk about that. How are you meeting those more short-term, immediate, next 5-year demands for power infrastructure when, like we kind of touched on top, when it's so difficult with supply chains to get new power plants and with interconnection queues, and there are all these hurdles to actually getting more infrastructure built. So how are you meeting those short-term needs? That's for everyone.
I mean, certainly speeding up and improvements to the interconnection queue is a big part of it, right? So that's been a barrier. I think there is still improvements that we can make, but I'm not sure that we're the barrier anymore. I don't know that we're the longest pole in the tent. There's a lot of other things around permitting and siting. Access to capital and financing, uncertainty around financing. I think you get a lot of projects that get through the interconnection queue, they still don't get built. Well, why? And it was because of other factors related to financing that's very real. So what we're hearing is, certainty and predictability about our markets and what they can expect from market revenues and returns is crucial to get that investment and that financing that they need. We talked about that a little bit this morning. One of the panels did. So, those are things that we can do. One of the things we recognized we had to do is our reliability planning process was a biennial 10-year look ahead every 2 years. And the way the system's changing, that's just completely and totally inadequate. So now we do quarterly assessments because it changes that fast, and we need to be able to react to a reliability need according to that kind of cadence. So that's something where, every single quarter we look at new information, and if we've got a reliability need, then we've got triggers that we can act.
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot that we're doing, right? And Chair Thompson talked about the Reliability Resource Initiative, the Surplus Interconnection Service. But if I break it down, number one, it's to send the right price signal so that all of you can make the right investments. And I know there's a lot in that. I've got a lot of feedback from a lot of you around it's not just the right price signal, it's stability and predictability of the price signal and of the market rules that is important. We sent a price signal. Right? We had an auction for the 25-26 delivery year. It was a high price relative to history. And we're seeing a reaction. We've seen over 1,000 megawatts of generation rescind their retirement notices. We have seen almost 27 gigawatts come into our Reliability Resource Initiative with 94 different projects, half of which are uprates, which is really, really encouraging. And again, companies in this room have contributed to that, so I really appreciate it. We saw just this morning an announcement by Homer City Redevelopment, which is the site of the largest or former largest coal plant, I think in the United States actually, but certainly in Pennsylvania, that was just demolished last week, that is going to be redeveloped into a very large gas generator. We've seen a nuclear power plant do a deal with a data center company to come back. And so we're seeing a lot. We're seeing people that are in the queue accelerate their investment in the queue. So part of that is just sending the right price signal. Part of that is accelerating our work through the queue. But I think the math of it is we're going to have to avoid future retirements. some of which can be done through price signals, some of which require policy intervention. And so we're certainly talking to the policymakers. We need those who have retired to come back if they can, and not all can, but some can. We need to get through the queue more quickly. We need to access demand flexibility. I think that's a kind of a hidden gem that PJM has one of the largest organized demand response markets in the world, but even the data centers, most data centers are installing backup generation. That backup generation is environmentally restricted in how much they can run. But if we can access that flexibility, or through policy changes, increase that flexibility, even if it's for a transitional period, I think you can serve more data centers. It's not that we're short every hour of the year, right? We're short some hours of the year. And so if we can target that through demand flexibility, I think that's a big deal. And I think through a combination of what we're already seeing and getting creative around some of these other things, particularly demand flexibility, I think there's quite a bit we can do to serve load growth.
Anyone else? Any thoughts on that?
Just mention kind of what's going on the MISO queue side, like our partner ISOs and RTOs. MISO's queue process is backlogged and delayed. Our current 12-month process takes about 48 months to get through. So just a little context behind that. We've currently got an installed capacity base of about 200 gigawatts. Our queue currently has over 300 gigawatts in it. So that is a fixable problem. Unfortunately, it's not something that we can fix quickly. So we've implemented some redesign processes. We've brought in some automation capabilities to process the queue. But we think it's probably a 4 to 5 year process to work through that backlog and get down to our normal queue process is able to be processed in a 12-month period. So that's a problem when we're looking at near-term needs. We need to get generation online in the near term. So one of the things that we've done similar to PJM, we've made a recent filing for a parallel temporary process that's aimed at projects that focus on providing reliable, firm planning capacity that are attested to by a MISO load as well as their local regulator as a need for reliability. So that's a recent filing we've made, and we think that's also going to help get some of this needed highly accredited capacity online in MISO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a helpful look at what's kind of happening on the inside of the RTOs. And Rich, you kind of touched on external factors as well outside of the RTOs and the ISOs, and Manu, you also touched on just that there are policy changes as well. So could you all talk about what policy changes and other external factors would be helpful from your perspectives to kind of meet the urgency of the moment and help meet some of those short-term aims of getting generation on and transmission and infrastructure on more quickly than we're currently seeing?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. I mean, PJM has argued and asked for a long time any legislation that is being passed that could result in generators being forced to retire should have in it strong reliability safeguards and reliability analyses before as part of that legislation, and we continue to take that position. I think the other important policy change could be siting and permitting reform to get this infrastructure built. Because I think most people will acknowledge the need for infrastructure, but nobody really wants it near them. And that's understandable, right? It's large infrastructure, but it needs to be located and sited. And I think that could certainly be quicker.
Yeah, I do agree with the points Manu was making about considering the reliability implications of generator retirements. That doesn't mean that all the retirements need to be considered, but only those that have those reliability implications. Some of the plants are very old, will need to retire. They're not going to be able to support. I know to Rich's point, some of them are not going to be there in 5-10 years, so that's going to be a key element. And permitting reform and siting reform is critical. The other piece I do want to add, and you had asked Catherine, is about the planning processes and how we think about energy and resource adequacy. So for the longest, we've been thinking about the 1 in 10 as the way that we design the system around. So what 1 in 10 is that you are letting the system kind of have 1 day of outage in 10 years. But if you look at the data, or if you look at kind of an event, one event that is 20 hours 5 gigawatts. It's very different from a 2-hour, 500 megawatts. So I think we really need to change the planning processes to look at energy adequacy, not just resource adequacy, especially as the system has more and more renewables in the system. So I'll point to ERCOT that in December of last year passed some new resolution to look at reliability planning, where they were looking not just at the 1 in 10, but also at the duration and the magnitude of those outages. And so that's going to help us understand the risks and understand what are the infrastructure needs to be able to ride through all hours of the day as we see risks. So that would be one to advocate the planners to consider. I'll talk about the electric gas. I know you have a question there, but I'll stick to now for the planning, I'll stick to that one. We need to really expand our view on how we think planning as we think about reliability.
Yeah, when I think about policy, I focus hard on New York because that's my jurisdiction, and it's also, we have some unique situations in New York with, it's not just policy, it's climate legislation that was passed back in 2019 where, the legislation stipulates that 70% of the supply needs to be renewable by 2030 and the 100% of the supply needs to be carbon-free by 2040. We don't have any identified available technology to hit the 2040 goal, but even the governor has come out recently and recognized because of some of these delays we've seen in offshore wind, because of the delays we've seen in development, the 2030 goal is not achievable on the pace that we're on right now. Now you bring in all the economic development opportunities we're looking at, new manufacturing, onshoring of manufacturing, new data centers, and suddenly it's a jobs problem if we don't have enough adequate resources to be able to serve those. And so there's got to be some give in that, right? It's a collision course that just needs to be resolved. We're going to be in a situation where we're not going to be able to meet the economic development goals. We're not going to be able to support the data center growth and the build out without changes really to those policy goals because it's on a collision course with each other. So that's a New York specific answer, but that's just some of it's probably similar in a lot of different states where you got the policy goals that driven initially by climate objectives that seemed very noble and of course very popular, and now suddenly economic development and economic growth is going to be stymied if we can't think about ways to compromise on some of those objectives.
Yeah, certainly similar story for MISO. We operate in all or parts of 15 states, and I mentioned earlier, many of those about a decade ago started putting in state-level renewable portfolio standards. Good news is, here we are 10 years into this, and we've helped our states achieve nearly all of their reduction targets to date, but we're coming up on targets for 2030, 2035, that when you look at things like what is it really going to take to hit those targets, and you start considering things like load growth, and you start considering things like supply chain slowdowns, regulatory approval slowdowns, it really is starting to look like hitting some of those near-term 2030, 2035 targets are going to be a real challenge. So conversations are going to be hard because I agree something's going to have to give, and the sooner we can get in front of those conversations and start making decisions on how we're going to proceed through this next 10 years, I think will be important.
And I think we talked a lot about collaboration. There's an opportunity here for reasonable minds to recognize that we've got a number of different objectives that are all have some positive outcomes, but we can't do all of them, right? And that's where I think, when you start thinking about collaboration across the industry, but also across governments, is going to be necessary.
And I would just add, from a reliability perspective, diversity is important, a diverse portfolio. Going back to the environmental goals, when you look at the queues over the next 10 years, those are mainly renewables, at least when we looked at those over the last time. So you do need, one way to think about diversity is reliability's best friend as we think about the different resource contributions. So that would be another point, just the diversity in the resource, whether it be transmission, demand flexibility, all of those need to come into play to have a diverse portfolio, and that's what's going to allow us to meet some of these reliability challenges.
Yeah, thank you. And Camilo, I did want to talk to you a bit about transmission. I think we've talked a lot about generation here, but we're also talking about power infrastructure more broadly. And I feel like there's been kind of a false choice presented sometimes of well, it's generation or transmission. We can't focus on transmission because we need generation when it's that's really part of the equation, is getting this infrastructure built. So Camilo, could you talk a bit about the current state of transmission and infrastructure, and what is still needed to connect regions and really realize the full extent of sharing power across regions and helping reliability in that way?
Yeah. So what we saw and what we're seeing on our data is that we do see increased development of transmission in the U.S. to connect the regions, so that's positive. At the same time, we see in the data that many transmission projects are kind of caught up in siting and permitting delays, so that's a cause of concern. We have been doing some analysis. I think some of you know about the interregional transfer capability study that we did last year, filed with FERC in November, collecting a lot of comments. We filed our reply comments recently. But one of the pieces that we were doing there is assess what type of transfer capability would be prudent from a reliability perspective for the system. So that's an interesting approach, because what we needed to do is kind of look at all of the regions with the same set of assumptions and parameters, and understand where there could be opportunities to transfer for import or export capabilities between regions. What we found is that there is no one single solution. Some regions have high import capability and they don't need more. Some have very, very little and need a lot. So what we found total is that we needed 35 gigawatts of transfer capability across the regions, but it's not a one-size solution for all the regions. It needs to be dependent on the conditions in each of those. And the other piece that we found is that transmission alone is not going to solve all the issues. Sometimes you really need local resources to be able to address some of the energy needs. So that's a couple of the pieces that came out of the study.
Yeah, and I want to talk also about other resources like demand response, which we touched on a bit, and energy storage and distributed energy resources, and some of those other opportunities to close that gap without just building new plants, because like we've said, in the short term, there's just more needs to happen. So what does that look like in your regions, and what are there policy or market changes that are needed to kind of enable those resources to reach their full potential? That's for everyone.
Yeah, so I think it's going to be crucial. It's going to be absolutely necessary, and it's important to price it right and value it right? To incentivize the kind of behavior that we're going to need to see from consumers, from businesses, from industrials. In New York, we've got the full opportunity for resources above 10 kW to be able to participate in every aspect of our market through aggregation in our DER program. We have started to see enrollment in that, so we're starting to see participants that want to participate in the markets at the wholesale level, get scheduled day ahead, participate in ancillary services, just starting to scratch the surface. We need to be able to ultimately extend that down to smaller resources, right? So there's some practical aspects with the quantity and the volume of the types of participation that we need to work out from a market administrator. But once we get through that, I think that there's greater opportunity for involvement in that. But it's really important to get the pricing right, to get the incentives lined up such that people feel good about doing it, that they're willing to do it. And it's really about getting, to a large extent, the accreditation right in the capacity market, and also the locational elements of it, so that you're not sending a signal that's too muted to get the participation that you want, and also not too rich such that ultimately people, consumers will pay for that. So I think it's I think we're moving in the right direction. There's going to be some experience we got to get with that, and I think then there's really just the broader adoption.
Yeah, Rich said it really well. The only thing I'll add maybe to that is, for the first time, we're doing a quadrennial review, which is every 4 years we look at how our markets are calibrated, our capacity market in particular, and what the reference resource is, so what the market should be calibrated off of. And we're seeing for the first time storage is actually in some zones, at least one zone, cheaper than thermal units. And so that's a pretty interesting development. Now, storage is still pretty expensive, actually, right? And so that's reflecting the fact that prices have gone up for anything that's got a turbine related to it. Prices have gone up significantly. And so, we're coming up against affordability concerns, And we've seen intervention by regulators in our market related to affordability. And I think it's important. I think that applies to the transmission question. And we have to be really prudent about what transmission we do build, because someone's going to pay for it, and that goes into the affordability equation as well. Same thing with generation as well. But I echo everything that Rich says. I mean, every kind of resource that we can access, and creating the market signals to get those resources incentivized to participate is critical, and something certainly we are focused on at PJM.
In the MISO region, there hasn't been a lot of interest from membership or our states to really tightly integrate demand response into MISO's markets and processes to date. I mentioned earlier, we're at planning minimums. We're scrambling as a region just to try to stay at the level we're at from an accredited capacity perspective. Now with the prospect of load growth through data centers and other opportunities, states and members are interested in what are other things we can do so we don't miss out on these opportunities. And so our membership is just recently starting to ask questions about demand response and load management as a resource to manage both the economic development opportunities with load growth additions while ensuring our process has the capability to stay reliable. So in MISO's Order 2222 compliance, we'd kind of put out full compliance with that later in the decade. So we're looking at ways, what it would take to really kind of accelerate and bring our markets into a higher level of maturity with integration with distributed assets and demand response as a potential way of mitigating some of these concerns.
Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about what's going on a few blocks away from here in the White House. We are about 2.5 months into a new administration, and a lot has happened, but I think probably most relevant to this conversation is the conversation that's happening today around tariffs. And I'm wondering if you all could talk through how that's impacting the way you're thinking about everything we're talking about here, especially how it's impacting supply chains and your ability to have some certainty in the future. How are you all thinking about tariffs and those potential impacts?
Well, the tariffs themselves, there's a cost element to that, which we have put together a construct for how, if it turns out that we actually do need to implement them and collect them, we've got the capability in our tariffs to do it. We've firmly made the case that we shouldn't do it, and it's not a good idea to do it. And when you think about the mutual benefits of relying on our neighbors across the border for both emergency power and even for just regular economic transfers, there's a tremendous value in the tight coordination. I mean, it's just, having a large interconnected system is incredibly valuable. What I worry about, and when you start thinking about resource adequacy, is, we set our reliability margins on presumptions of how much emergency power we're going to get from Canada. We set a lot of our capacity market constructs on presumptions about participation from Canada. And if we get into a situation where the politics escalates and we suddenly can't count on that for anything anymore, then there's going to be a real reliability concern. The system is going to work just fine right now, but when you start thinking what that's going to do to our reserve margins and our planning systems, that point in the future that we're planning to run out of reserve margin and fail to meet reliability criteria if we don't do something big gets really close. So, we've got our eyes closely on that, and we're planning for some of those contingencies if we get there. We're going to be okay this summer, but, if it gets really, really drastic really fast, then who knows what the next summer or the next summer after that looks like.
Yeah, I would add, for us, we're not directly connected to Canada and don't rely on Canadian reserves directly, but certainly a lot of bulk power system components are manufactured outside the United States, right? And so it's not clear to me what the tariffs will be and on whom they will be, but if they affect the price of bulk power system components, particularly transformers and switching equipment, et cetera, that is going to be reflected in the price signal we're going to have to send to induce new generation. And you do come up against that affordability challenge that I was talking about earlier.
I was just going to say, in addition to Rich's point as it relates to the tariffs to Canada, we have 31 tie lines with Canada. the systems are designed to work together electrically. So besides the energy adequacy issues that Rich was pointing to, there is some other reliability services that we count on the two systems providing to each other. Will be voltage, frequency support. So if you have an extended period, you don't get that power from Canada, there could be other implications beyond just the energy or having the enough energy to meet demand.
Thank you. We have about a little less than 30 minutes left, and I realize I don't think I've given the alert for the Q&A yet. And as I said, great panel, so I'm sure some folks in the audience want to ask some questions. I believe those instructions will go up on the screen. Yes, there they are, because I was going to say I don't remember them. So those are the instructions. Feel free to send in questions, and I'll get to them in about 10 minutes or so. But I did want to give Camilo, you another question. Just because NERC has such an eagle-eye view, and you've given NERC, not you specifically, but NERC has given several warnings about reliability risks. Could you talk through the regulatory or policy actions that you think are most urgently needed today to solve these concerns that you all have laid out at both the federal and state level?
Sure. So I think if we go back to what are the main risks, boiling it down to some of the key risks that the system faces. One is related to energy adequacy, and the other one I keep coming back with the system relying a lot on the gas infrastructure. So those are the two main ones. So sticking to those two, we have many other risks that we're managing. I'm not even talking about security risks that we're faced with. On the first one, we really, as I indicated, we need to change the way we plan for energy and resource adequacy. And I'll keep hammering in that point, because if we don't have a complete and full picture of what the risk is, we're not going to be able to address it. So that's going to be one where all the planners, and we'll have a role to play there as well to get us to having that full, complete picture of what the risk is. The second one is we do need infrastructure. We need gas, we need generation, and we need transmission infrastructure. So anything that we do to remove barriers for the implementation of that infrastructure, and we see that the current administration has highlighted that as one of the areas of focus. So welcome efforts in that area, because those we would need. In the meantime, we're going to have to be running the system very tight and have a posture to be able to work through those. And I think we saw in the past winter some good examples of how we can do that. We have tight conditions, cold weather, we're able to do well. On the gas side, I think we do need to see some, and we haven't talked too much about the electric gas. I know we talked about it in the prior panels. We continue to see momentum in that space, and we engage quite a bit with our friends in the gas trades, and we see voluntary commitments in that area. But we still, especially for the folks in this room, we need to see some market reforms that do provide incentives to generators to take the actions that are going to help during reliability events. So that's one area that we do want to see some momentum. And then ultimately, we also want to see or consider that we need to evaluate where we need to have some regulatory reforms on the gas side to ensure that there is a level of standards similar to what we have in the electric side, where we're working through a lot of standards on the winterization side of the house. We don't have those on the gas side. So some way to begin to bring, given the high reliance that we have on the gas system, to bring it to the level that we have on the electric side, given how important it's going to be for us into the future. So a whole range of things I cover there, some more short-term, some more long-term. But definitely, if you look at those two main risks, those are some of the things that we need to be working on.
Yeah, and if I could, Camilo, just build on what you said, to give an example around the implications of the gas system. We saw in January, we set a new winter peak load all-time, 145 gigawatts. And we saw during that event, and of course the event was over a 4-day weekend, and of course the Saturday was like 67 degrees. It was beautiful. And the gas system became incredibly inflexible. I don't know how much of that, I think a lot of that is the rate of growth of gas demand has significantly outpaced the rate of investment in pipes and storage. But that doesn't explain to me why you have to buy a 4-day package of gas because it's a 4-day weekend, when other days you can buy 1 day at a time. So I think there's opportunities there. But the net result as a grid operator was several of our gas generators called us and said, we have very little flexibility. So commit us and run us like a nuke, or run us within a very tight band. And so, talking about resource adequacy, it's not just having resources, it's the ability to dispatch the resources where you want them. And so for that period, we got around it by trying to respect, to the extent that we could, the operating constraints of the units. But the most flexible units dispatchable on our system were our oil-fired CTs. Okay? And I think that's one way to deal with the problem right now, but I do think we need significant investment in gas infrastructure, in addition to additional reforms around electric gas coordination. So I just wanted to reinforce that point. I mean, we just saw that happen in January.
I think as an industry, we've got to find a way to accelerate the pace of getting accredited capacity deployed and online. I mentioned we've got a 300 gigawatt clogged queue process. The other side of that, we've got 60 gigawatts of projects out there with approved interconnection agreements. Of those 60, those are 60 gigawatts that have approvals that aren't yet deployed and online. More than half of that 60 gigawatts is requesting and notifying MISO of delays in their implementation. So what are those headwinds that they're pointing to? It's supply chain, generation, transmission equipment, it's regulatory approvals. Some of it's securing financing. So 60 gigawatts of projects sitting there having trouble getting online. What we need just at MISO, not even thinking about the load growth issue, to maintain the minimums, the treading water I mentioned earlier, we need MISO to add about 6.5 gigawatts of accredited capacity a year over the next 5 years to stay at minimum. Over the most recent 5 years, the MISO region has averaged just 2.5 gigawatts of accredited capacity. We need to find a way, whether it's policy, whether it's legislation, whether it's process, or whether it's commercial opportunities, we need to find a way to really accelerate the pace of getting the accredited firm capacity online, or we're going to fall behind pretty quickly.
I think one other quick thing, and I know you're looking to move on. Shifting gears a tiny bit, thinking about interconnections, we talked about the uncertainty around these loads. Where are they? When are they going to come in? How are they going to come in? We've spent a tremendous amount of time over the last 3-4 years refining, reforming, improving the generation supply interconnect process. And in New York, that binder is just slightly thinner than War and Peace. But the number of sentences dedicated to load interconnections in our tariff is 4 sentences. So when you start thinking about the predictability for those developers, the certainty that we need as planners, we need to get, and I know this is common across every one of our footprints, we need to have more clarity, more consistency, more predictability in that. It will help our planners better. It will help those developers get more certainty and understanding around how cost allocation and upgrades would need to be managed. Because right now, folks come to me and say, what should I expect? And it's like, I don't know. We're still working through it.
Okay, I'll get in one more question before we get to the Q&A, because we've already gotten some good questions, so thank you all. I want to ask about FERC specifically, because we've talked a lot about different policies, regulations, but we had 2 FERC commissioners here today. I cover FERC personally quite closely, so I would love to hear from all of you. What specifically would, if anything, would you like to see from FERC to address this issue of resource adequacy? How could they best help you?
Well, most immediately, we filed our FERC Order 2023 compliance filing in August of last year and immediately started with the new cluster study, and we still don't know if that's approved, right? So that's something where we're kind of, we're going down the path that what we have put in place is going to be compliant, and we're not going to have to disrupt it, and we're making great progress on it, but we actually still haven't got an answer back from FERC, and that's a risk out there for everybody that's in this cluster.
Yeah, I'll say FERC has generally been supportive of a lot of things that we've put in front of them around interconnection, surplus interconnection, reliability resource initiative. They've been very thoughtful in their interactions. We do have pre-filing meetings, and then, of course, once you file, you can't talk about it anymore. But they give us really good guidance, and so really they're critical to our success, and I'm appreciative of the support they've given.
Yeah,
Many of our filings.
I'd share that sentiment. MISO, we've made a half dozen significant filings over the last few years, and we've gotten a lot of support from FERC. Asking for more timely approval of our filings, I guess, is an easy thing to hope for, but I share that sentiment. We've been very happy with the support we've received from FERC. so far?
Yeah, I would say on our end, definitely we work very closely with FERC, especially as it relates to all the standard work that we do, and so we have a great relationship. Two other topics that I think are important as part of our dialogue with them. One is on the energy planning, and especially how we think about resource contributions, a variety of resources during peak times. And that's going to be important. We talk about ELCC, regions use ELCC differently, states use it differently, but ultimately resources contribute what they contribute. So how do we think about those resource contribution during times of peak, and is there a way to have a more consistent methodology in that space? That's one. And the second one is on the electric gas. And again, it's what tools does FERC have to work with the gas industry to bring that level of attention to reliability? Not that they don't have it, but at the same level that we have it here on the electric side. So that would be one where we can work with FERC and identify what tools are at the disposal to bring that to the level that we have on the electric side.
Great, thank you. Okay, I'm going to turn to audience questions. So I'm going to start with this one. What are the primary driver of power plant retirements these days? And the context is, given tightening supply and demand conditions, are resources still retiring for economic reasons?
I don't see generators retiring for economic reasons at the moment. In fact, they're reversing their retirements for economic reasons. So there's negative retirements for economic reasons. In terms of policies, I mean, there's definitely EPA policies, whether it's the Good Neighbor Rule or ELG or coal combustion residuals, were several of them. And then each of our states has a different policy landscape. So I think it's a mix of those as well. But again, I think that a lot of the policy pronouncements out of this administration seem to be setting a different course. So I think we'll have to see where that goes. And I think our states are having this conversation that Rich teed up around, look, there are trade-offs to be made, and there's economic development on the table. So how do you deal with the supply? I think there are thoughtful conversations happening in the states and in D.C., and we'll have to see where they go.
Same in New York. I mean, I think it's all policy-driven, whether it's through emissions. The retirement of Indian Point in 2019 was based on security and safety concerns for New York City. A lot of the retirement of planned retirement in the most recent governor's budget to retire a bunch of the peakers in and around in New York City were based on societal issues, environmental justice, the communities in which they're based. So it's all really policy-driven from a retirement standpoint.
Yeah, policy-driven retirements were the reality up to 2022 until we hit the bottom. And we've seen our states and our members really slow down and defer the retirement. Since that time, I keep using the term treading water. That's been one of the primary tools our members have used to tread water to stay at minimums, is pushing out retirements. So that's a solution that will get you some near to medium-term benefits, but longer term, we've got to find a way to get new capacity through our processes and built it online.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I've got a couple questions about power flows across different regions, not just Canada, but between the US as well. And specifically because the ISOs rely on the ability to import power from each other during high load events, but as each of the ISOs are getting tighter, how does this change that process of sending flows to each other and sharing power?
Well, look, in our reliability planning, we have this concept of capacity benefit of ties. Right? And our net, for PJM, net capacity benefit of ties is 1.5% of our reliability requirement, which is something that you think about as everyone around you and yourself are getting less flush with capacity. So it's something we're thinking about. Is that the right number? But the truth is, in the observed events, and we have gotten help. Like Rich sent us a couple of thousand megawatts during Winter Storm Elliott that helped us keep the lights on. Simultaneously, we were sending power to TVA when they were shedding load. Winter Storm Uri, we exported a total of, at peak, over 15 gigawatts. So the value of the interconnection is tremendous. And there's a bifurcated question. How do you deal with that in planning? How much can you count on? And then in operations, we're going to send everything we can send or ask for everything we need. And often we'll get it.
Yeah, and I think we got a great track record of bailing each other out when it's necessary. But from that planning standpoint, in our most recent reserve margin process, we reduced what we would expect in emergency support from both PJM and from New England, not because we don't have a great track record of helping each other out, but they're tight. So if they're going to be tight when we're going to be tight, we shouldn't bank on getting as much as we can. And it resulted in a 2% increase in our reserve margin for the year.
And I would say on this topic, one of the things that we're trying to do as we do our long-term reliability assessments is have a better view, what we call wide area energy assessment. So we're evaluating what is the resource capabilities of all the regions and how much you can count. So we'll be including that in our ongoing reliability assessment so we have a fuller picture of that interaction between regions. So at least on the planning side, you can make the decisions then that become operational later.
Yeah, I worry about the size of these storms. Camilo, you mentioned that earlier. You look back to Winter Storm Uri a few years ago, big storm, but you look at its main impact, it was mostly hitting about 2/3 of the Eastern Interconnect, which freed up, I think PJM was mostly spared the brunt of that and was able to support the interconnect. If you look at this year's winter storm, I think it was Enzo, there was about a day-and-a-half period where that storm was covering 90+% of the whole Eastern Interconnect. Now, we're all pretty happy with our operating performance through Enzo this year, and rightfully so, but if you look at the conditions of why that was true, generally we all saw very good fleet performance from the legacy dispatchable fleet. We also had pretty high output from renewables during Enzo.
Yep.
And that's the wild card. Back to Uri and Elliott, pretty low renewable output combined with relatively poor performance of the dispatchable fleet. We managed to get through it because it was a relatively smaller storm. We had good performance this time, big storm, low forced outages across the interconnect generally, as far as I can tell. With high renewable output, well, that's a recipe for a successful weekend. But you know, without those renewables or one of those other variables not going on our way, with the size of that storm, we could have had a challenge somewhere in the Eastern Interconnect.
Okay, this goes back a bit to how Todd ended the last panel, so full circle here. Not that this panel's ending, don't worry. So this is gas electric coordination has been a topic for 20 years. It's pretty clear that it's becoming more important and not less. Other than build more pipelines, what do you see as an answer?
I don't know if it's an answer. I think one of the things, and I have a lot of conversations with my colleagues over at on the gas side, the way that we're going to use gas is going to be very different, right? Where when you think about the contribution of renewables over time, as Todd indicated, sometimes it's really good and we don't need as much gas, and sometimes it's zero and we need a ton of gas. And just thinking about how the gas system is planned and how the product is priced, the usage patterns are going to be much more drastic, and it's going to be more intermittent. And I think that we need to carefully consider how those gas markets are how they function and how it's priced and how it aligns better with how the energy market is going to perform and how the electric system is going to perform. I don't have an answer. I mean, I've had these conversations and I don't have a very good answer, but that's a problem. And it's going to be a problem for both of us, 10 years from now.
Yeah, I did want to give a shout out to the amount of coordination that actually does happen. I mean, there's a ton of coordination that's happening between the pipelines and us during a winter storm. We're talking to them multiple times a day. We're understanding what our generators have scheduled and comparing that to what we think we'll need from our generators. So we've got a pretty good sense. And the pipelines will typically call us if they're going to cut someone off. Sometimes we can talk them out of it. So there's a lot of coordination. I think part of the issue is there's not a lot of flexibility on their system, right? They're tightening up their operational flexibility because they have to serve human needs customers, or at least what are called human needs customers. I would argue our customers are also human needs customers. And so that's why I keep coming back to it. I think you have to build the infrastructure. It's not that they have flexibility and they aren't providing it. At least I'm not aware of that. I think a lot of it is they don't have the ability to support the flexibility that we're demanding from them. Another way to deal with it is through more backup, more dual fuel backup generation. And that's how New York has dealt with their gas challenge, and we've benefited from that from time to time as well.
We agree. We have a really good control room to control room relationship with our pipeline operators, which is good. We put some of those protocols in place in the early years of this 10-year journey of gas-electric coordination. In the last 8 years or so, we've not seen a lot of meaningful progress in those processes. I think the business day-only scheduling reality for the gas system is, from our perspective, the current biggest concern, and we're not seeing a lot of momentum there. We're not seeing a lot of interest from the gas industry side on that. So at MISO, we've become kind of pessimistic that the coordination efforts are really going to play out to make meaningful improvements in the way we operate our markets and their markets to support operations reliability. So we're starting to move down the path that Rich mentioned of thinking about to make distinctions through the accreditation process to recognize dual fuel units or firm gas units versus non-firm only type resources.
Yeah, I would say, and I'll make a plug, recently at NERC we published a two-pager on how we see the gas-electric coordination issues. We identified the risks, the mitigation strategies. We identified 7 different mitigation strategies, from winterization, how we think of winterization both on the electric and the gas, to regulatory reform that I indicated before. So we do think there are multiple levers to work here. We do see that the gas industry is leaning in, so we have an opportunity to work with them. They have established, for example, a natural gas readiness forum to improve the communication protocols between the two industries. A lot of work is left to be done, so we do not see yet that meaningful structural change. But there is a number of opportunities that we have, and we just need to get the industry to see what the role that FERC can play. At the same time, on the electric industry side, we need to be working on the things that we control. So we'll talk about the winterization standards. We have a cold weather standard here that our board will act here on Friday. We're also doing a lot of studies to truly understand the risk that we have on the electric system as it relates to the gas. I'll point to a study that MPCC, our regional entity in the Northeast, did, looking at New York and New England, and look at the very detailed level, looking at the gas system. What are the contingencies in the gas system that will create issues on the electric? And there are a number of those in New York and New England, especially in New England. We need to do that type of study across the entire US, so when we go talk to the gas industry, we have hard data in terms of what is that we need to see happen, for example, from a winterization or other changes into the system. So I'll just call out that there are things that we could do to inform that relationship with the gas industry. The gas industry, I know, is willing to work, but we need to come with them with some very specific requests, at least on that point on winterization.
Great. Okay, I got a question about capacity prices, probably for Manu, but I'll allow others to answer as well. Do you think a 1-year capacity price is sufficient for developers to build new merchant generation? Are you considering market design alternatives to provide longer-term revenue certainty?
Yeah, I think a 1-year price signal it's a continuum, right? There are certain projects that are already through the queue that might get accelerated because of a 1-year signal. There's demand response that might show up that wouldn't otherwise. I think a greenfield new generator, it's not going to show up for just a 1-year signal. It's going to be an expectation of prices. And frankly, I think a lot of generators are looking to build off of something that's financeable, right? And what's financeable is a PPA, which is built off an expectation of multi-year prices. So I think it's a continuum like that. What was the second part of your question?
The second part was, are you considering market design alternatives to provide longer-term revenue certainty?
Yeah, I think right now what we're considering is our quadrennial review. I think what the quadrennial review will show, I think what it might show is that if you try to map the intersection between prices that investors will need to build and prices that political leaders and consumers will consider acceptable, there may be not an overlap between those two sets, right? And so then what do you do? I think that's the conversation I think that our quadrennial review is leading to, and I don't want to shy away from that conversation because I think that we do need to rely on markets. I think markets need stability in rules, and those rules need to work for those who are paying the bills ultimately, and they need to work for all the people in this room, for the people who are putting up their money. And so I think that's where we're headed. So I didn't really answer the question, are we considering multi-year markets? I think it's tough to bifurcate your markets. It's tough to have a multi-year product and then a 1 year at a time product, because then who do you offer one to and who do you offer the other to? But I think the issue that we're headed for, not just in PJM, I think nationally, is this issue of affordability, because the supply, even before we talk about the tariffs that may or may not be coming, is just getting very, very expensive, whether it comes to turbine premiums or switchgear premiums or transformer premiums. So that's a non-answer to your question.
I'm just going to say that, we have a prompt market in New York, so is that adequate? In and of itself, it's not adequate, and I approach it from the standpoint of what's really necessary is clear transparency about how the market assumptions are set up, to the greatest extent possible alignment of our planning studies with our market construct and our market design, so that there's that understanding, that predictability, the transparency of where the market's going to go. That's part of the process, that's part of the picture, and I think that along with making the models freely available for everybody to take that data, take those models, and do their own projections, that helps investors gain certainty about the market, that how it's going to perform in the future, and the predictability and the consistency. So from my standpoint, is a longer signal necessary? In the market itself, I don't believe that it is, as long as you've got that transparency, you've got that predictability in your share, and you've got that alignment between your planning studies. That said, we're always looking at our markets. I think everyone in this room knows, we got a lot of pushback from our stakeholders last year. They'd like to re-examine whether the prompt market, whether the existing market structure is in line with the transition we're seeing across the generation fleet. We're a customer-centric organization. We agreed to do that, have that discussion, and take a look at that. Does that mean we're going to change our markets fundamentally? It doesn't. It just means we're going to have the conversation, we're going to hear all parties, and we're going to try to make sure that we've got the market that people are confident in. It's matching the right kind of reliability signal. And I went over time, so sorry for that.
No worries. No, yeah, thank you. We are at time. I'll let Todd keep things on track here. But thank you so much. This was a really enlightening conversation, and yeah, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.